This is the Unshaw Podcast, the podcast about atheism, religion, and everything in between.
Welcome, seekers and skeptics, to the Unshaw Podcast. Today we crack open the human experience and explore the messy crossroads of faith and doubt, all through the lens of one extraordinary woman, Ruth Marx. Buckle up, because this ain't your Sunday school sermon. Picture a young gal, her heart ablaze with evangelical fervour, London marches, Billy Graham rallies, dancing under the influence of the Holy Spirit on the dance floor. That was Ruth, once. But buckle up, because the plot thickens faster than a theological debate. Theology classes at university blew her mind. Questions crackled like lightning. Social justice, LGBTQ+ rights, the very fabric of belief. The cracks started to show, and the dam of certainty eventually burst. The nails got pulled from the coffin of her faith. And now, atheist. Fully blown, card-carrying Richard Dawkins quoting atheist. But here's the twist. Ruth still loves religion. It's like a fascinating ex that she can't help but dissect and analyse. But on the Unshaw Podcast, we do it with respect, open hearts, and a healthy dose of humour. We'll peel back the onion layers of belief, expose the messy bits, and see what truth sparkles beneath. Join us as we unstitch Ruth's faith, unravel her doubts, and get a little dirty with the human experience. You might not find answers, but you'll definitely find stories. Stories that shimmer with the complexity of belief, the sting of doubt, and the messy beauty of a life lived on the edge of the unknown. So, welcome, Ruth, to the Unshaw Podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
What I understand is that you were born into a household where belief in God was an established fact. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that just, I was raised believing it. It wasn't even about, I didn't feel that it was forced on me as something to believe. It just was a fact of life, you know. I was raised with a very sure and certain sense that there was something and it made sense of the whole world, you know.
So were your parents practicing Christians?
Yeah, very much. Church as a community, but also sort of Christianity in the home was sort of central. It still is to my family, very much so. We used to do things like pray before every car journey, that Jesus would protect us and keep us safe. Prayers before every meal to thank God and Jesus for, you know, for the food there. So it was just part of the fabric of life. Prayers every night before bed, and you know, memories of my mum sitting quietly reading her Bible every morning in the same chair in the kitchen. That was just part of the routine, but also the church that we were part of as well was like family to us.
I'm guessing you were seen as the Christian girl at school then?
Yes. I wasn't seen as the Christian girl at school. I made it very, very well publicly known that I was a Christian.
Okay.
And I wanted to tell everybody about it and give everyone else this chance at knowing this, I don't know, this amazing God, this amazing peace, security, hope. I thought, you know, if this is it, then everyone needs to know it, you know.
Yeah, sure. I remember speaking to a Christian once who said, you know, I need to try and convert people. I need to proselytize, because imagine if you knew the cure for cancer, for example. Yeah. You'd want to share it with everybody, wouldn't you? And certainly, you know, I'm picturing you as this young girl, knowing the route to salvation and perhaps being a little bit concerned that other people of your age didn't know about it.
It wasn't for me that I felt like they had to believe, but I just thought they at least had to have the opportunity. They at least had to hear about it and make a choice, you know? At least if they'd heard about it, then I'd given them that chance to know what I knew. And for me, it was very much a feeling, because I was raised at a certain time where we went to the Bible camps I've got such amazing happy memories of being there together with people who are still like good friends now.
Mm.
But at these camps, it was kind of at the height of the Toronto blessings. Don't know if people have known about that. I teach about it now in religious studies. And sort of very charismatic, very intense, powerful feelings of God. So I really felt that it was really real, you know, and people could know this feeling too, was something I wanted to share with people.
Was it a traditional Church of England church?
Yeah, quite traditional Church of England church that was going through, I guess, kind of a particularly perhaps evangelical phase.
Okay.
So it was quite traditional, but not like high church traditional, just sort of Church of England, Protestant, worship band at the front with a guitar kind of thing. But there were two different buildings. And so one was the much more traditional sort of old stone church in the village, which was organ music and a choir all in the gowns and everything. And then we had a second church building that was up in an estate, which was much more kind of family focused, where we had a worship band that played, and I used to play in that as well, a lot more youth activities and that kind of thing. So we had these two sides. I grew up very much feeling like I had both of those sides to my faith, and I could go and sit in the old stone church. I used to sit and play the piano for hours and just sort of meditate in the stones with the candles and the stained glass windows and have that kind of sense. But then I could also go on a Sunday night and be with my friends in the youth club in the other church building, and they do lots and lots and lots of activities there for families that aren't necessarily heavily religious. There's kind of a community sense there, yeah.
And then on to Durham University to study theology.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to a number of people who have followed the same route as you. They've had a religious upbringing.
Yeah.
And they have thought to themselves, oh, I know, university, I'll study theology because I'll get to know God better. I'll learn more about my faith. Theology at university level tends to be a bit more critical about the truth claims of religion, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that's not why I took it, actually. I took it because, I did think I was going to be a church leader. At the time, I was preaching a lot in our church. I'd gone to Africa a lot with my family and preached there. I used to do so-called prayer clubbing, went night clubbing, and I was praying in the nightclubs trying to convert people. So I really felt that was my calling and that was what I was going to do. But the reason I went to go and do theology was because someone actually said to me, oh, don't go and do that because you're going to end up questioning your faith. And I said, what? No, of course not. I'm going to learn about my faith. And they said, this is a church. No, I don't think you should because you're going to come out an atheist. And that to me was like, right, if there's something that's going to turn me, I need to face it head on. I need to know this. I met someone several years earlier at a party who I'd tried to convert because I was in the corner of a party trying to convert people, not drinking, everybody else was. I was just trying to talk to them about God. And he was a philosophy student. He picked up a bottle top because he was drinking a beer. I wasn't. Could your God make this bottle top too heavy for God to pick up? And I was so shocked. I was 15 at the time. I don't know. And he said, well, why don't you come back to me with your answer? And I was like, okay. And we talked all night about God, philosophy, theology. And then we wrote letters to each other. This is before Facebook and Twitter and everything like that. And I used to wait for these letters. He'd write me these 30-page letters. I'd write them back. And it sort of sowed this seed of this is what I could study at university. But I was determined that I would solve it. I would prove that there is a God. I would learn all of this and I would be able to prove it. Now, why didn't I pick philosophy as a degree? Maybe I was a bit scared, a bit nervous that would turn me. But I felt that doing theology, I would be able to have these answers.
Your friend's question sounds a lot like, it's a variation on a theme, isn't it? Can God make 2 + 2 = 5, a rock so heavy that he couldn't lift, and so on?
Can he make a prison that he can't break out of? My friends at the time, I went through a bit of a crisis. I was about 15 after this, and I knew this was going to rock my world. I knew what it was going to do to my family. I knew what it was going to do if I didn't believe anymore. This is the glimpse I had at 15, so it was before I did my degree. I had some really good friends at school. They just didn't know what was going on, and they said to me since, we kind of wished you were coming out as gay or something because we could have actually helped you with that. But when you said you were having an existential crisis, sat under a tree in the corner of the playground not talking to anyone because you didn't know if you believed in God or not. They just didn't know what to say or do. But I kind of got my faith back through going to more Bible camps. I went to something called Soul Survivor a few times and had some intense religious experiences, and they kind of carried me through.
The seeds of doubt were sown prior to your entry to university then?
Yeah.
Tell me what happened at university then.
So I absolutely loved it. The first year, to be with all these people who were asking the same things as me. No, I went into the Christian bookshop in the cathedral and the books just blew me away. They were books on all these things I'd been asking and had asked of me, and I just couldn't believe that there was this whole world of people who'd published things about this and written things about it. And I was scrolling along the shelf, and then I saw Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. And my jaw just nearly hit the floor of the room because I'd never, I was just like, what? Someone's written a book like that and it's in a cathedral bookshop? What are they doing? Does someone know this is on the shelf? That's what I thought, only really seen in our church bookshop, obviously, our church bookstore, really Christian things. And that's what I'd read a lot of. Not that it wasn't allowed to, but I just hadn't encountered that. I suppose I just soaked it all up. I loved it. I just was reading everything I could read, and I was talking to everyone I could, obviously, about Jesus and Christianity, got heavily into the Christian Union. And yeah, I really loved that first year. But then through the year, I just started to learn things that I hadn't ever really learned about the Bible and about Christianity.
Sure. So presumably you had the belief when you were younger that, for example, the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses and disciples of Jesus and so on.
Yeah. And that the Torah was written by Moses, which I know a lot of people still do believe, but I hadn't even heard that there was this theory that it was compiled over many phases and times and different people. And the Synoptic Gospels and the New Gospel and the Dead Sea Scrolls, all of this. And then the thing that really shook me was how it was canonized, like how it was decided what was in and what was not. I hadn't ever thought of that. You know, why is there some books that were written at the same time that aren't in there? And then also the thing that really, really shook me was about Paul. And did Paul write the letters that are from Paul?
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, okay, so it's truth, is it? But then when it says the line, I, Paul, write to you, I'm like, well, that's a lie then, isn't it? If it isn't actually Paul. Oh, it's a different kind of truth. And that was, wow, it was just seismic to me, yeah.
I remember reading a book by Bart Ehrman once, who you've no doubt heard of. And he's a professor of New Testament at a university in America. And in one of his books, he talks about the fact that a lot of the people who are on his New Testament course, kind of new undergraduates, they're actually not very clued up about where the Bible came from, and they imagine that it just sort of fell from heaven one day in its completed form.
It is called God's Word.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that my family stopped me knowing anything else about it. I don't know. It's like, I don't want it to come across as I couldn't think freely, I couldn't investigate, I couldn't look into it. Absolutely, you know, I could. But it was just a given thing but here is the Word of God, and we base everything in our life around it. Bible quotes on the wall, this is the Word of God. So you just end up thinking, oh, it's a book that God has dictated into the ear of person who's written it down.
Yeah.
And that's that. I mean, maybe now it's different, you know, this is many years later and maybe it is different. But at the time when that was questioned for me, it just started me thinking differently about something. And I'd always just assumed it was different.
I think a lot of Christians do have almost an Islamic belief about the Bible, that this is God dictating stuff.
Yeah, that it's dictated and there it is. But it's similar to when I've learned about the Quran, that I thought that it's like a book that was revealed in one go. It was something that was revealed over many years, which I understood quite quickly when I sort of investigated it. But then it wasn't written down as it was revealed. It was kind of compiled later. I just find that so fascinating. But then many of the things I talk to my students about come from the Hadith. People often think, oh, is that a book you take off the shelf? No, that's something that's been debated and questioned, and some are in and some are out. I guess it's what happens in all religions, really, isn't it, when you've got a holy book that's passed down? But I thought the Bible was different, you know. What I thought was, I didn't think other religions were bad or, you know, anything like that. I just thought they didn't have the right one. Ours was different, you know. We knew God in a way that was different to other people because I could feel him.
So tell me about your work with the organisation called Speak at university.
Yeah, so I definitely always had, and this has been from my parents as well, who have just got such massive hearts for other people. You know, in my home, every Sunday almost, or, you know, I felt like every Sunday we'd have a different person appearing for lunch because they were on their own at church, and my parents had said, oh, you need to come and have Sunday lunch with us, you know. We were spending our time in Africa and Uganda building schools and things like that. Such big hearts to make the world a better place, you know.
Yeah.
That I grew up with that. And so when I got to university, that was another thing that I really wanted to do. So I used to volunteer at the fair trade shop in the church there. And as soon as I found ways to get involved with sort of social justice, anti-sweatshop was a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Kind of all like Naomi Klein, No Logo was coming out at that time. And then the anti-war movement with the, invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan and the 9/11 that happened. When a group called Speak, and they were a university group that was sort of trying to straddle or be a point of contact between the sort of Christian Union group, but also the kind of environmental groups.
Right.
I think they were trying to show that Christians could care about those issues, but also if you cared about those issues, you could maybe become a Christian if you wanted to sort of straddle between the two. And for me, it was like a perfect fit. And I got really involved with it. And also there was a kind of charismatic strand to the worship that we had as well, which kind of obviously appealed to me.
So tell us about the resistance that you encountered concerning your involvement with this group.
Yeah, we had a very committed core group. But the thing about Durham, and I don't know if it's the same at other universities, I don't know if it's the same anymore, of course, this is just my experience from, many moons ago, was that there were many, many, many Christians there, especially in our theology degree, and not very many sort of atheists for us to go and convert.
Yeah.
So we had so many different Christian groups. We were kind of all sort of competing for space and time. So even like the one atheist on our course, we just called him Atheist Dead because he was the only one. I mean, there was probably a few more, but there was, we were all like competing who's going to convert him kind of thing. And so I think there was this sense of competition of who's running the Christian group where everyone's going to go to. Speak was one, but then you had different organizations that were running Christian unions, for example. Now then they would have their slant and their particular emphasis that they feel it should have. The sort of Christian union, the Durham Christian Union, meeting every Saturday night in town, all the kind of Protestant Christians would go to this. So we thought, well, what a great opportunity to have just a petition like at the back. Can you come and sign this? It was against like something to do with the arms trade. I think the UK was selling weapons to someone that was doing something horrific somewhere. Probably hasn't changed in the last 20 years. And they said no, because our only aim is to evangelize.
Okay.
And I was like, right. And that was a real moment for me. Like, okay, I thought we were all like caring about the world here, wanting to do what Jesus would do, And that sort of thing, again, chipped away at my idea of what organised religion was doing. And then also Speak that I was with was funded by lots of different Christian groups. One Christian group said they wouldn't support us if we were supported by another certain Catholic group because they said Catholics aren't Christians. And I was like, okay. So the Catholic organisation said, it's okay, we'll support you, but you don't need to put us on your flyers. You don't need to say anything. We'll just do it sort of secretly. You don't have to show anyone. And then you can still get our support, but you're not going to get into trouble with this other group. And that really got me thinking as well. Came home from university to the church. Why haven't we got fair trade coffee here? I went saying to the vicar, how can we have coffee here that's not fair trade? And he said to me, well, the point of church is to bring people in and they might not find Jesus if they don't like the coffee.
Wow.
And I said, does it have to taste like the blood of the oppressed then, vicar? Like this.
Wow.
But I must say, now everything's fair trade at the church. They run a fair trade shop there. I came back once after not being religious, went in there and I looked and I saw all the fair trade stuff there. And I thought, wow, things do change. So I really don't want people to think that it's like that anymore. But these are just formative moments for me that sort of shaped how I think now.
So were you instrumental in getting fair trade adopted by your local church then?
No, I don't think so. It took many years and I was no longer there. And I don't think so, no.
So did you finish university as a practicing Christian?
No. Well, I don't know. It depends how you define practicing Christian. I think that by the end of university, I was very much, I love Jesus. I love the message of Jesus. We all need to care more about the world and each other. Yeah. But I wasn't the same as how I went in when I was in the first year.
So another thing which caused you to question your faith was your encounter with someone of the Baha'i faith. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I had this amazing, wonderful housemate who was Baha'i. Now, I'd never heard of the Baha'i faith before, but I absolutely loved learning about it. She loved telling us about it. We kind of matched each other with our evangelical zeal to tell each other about our beliefs. Our whole house was like so happy to have people who were willing to talk about these things, and we loved talking about all this. And we were all quite musical as well. So we played a lot of music together in the house. We had like hundreds of instruments almost in there. And so we were making music and talking about God a lot. And again, this is during the kind of peace movement or the Stop the War movement with the invasions in Afghanistan and then Iraq afterwards. And so we held a lot of prayer meetings for peace, prayer sessions for peace, music for peace, that kind of thing. And so the Baha'i faith, I don't know if listeners know much about it, it's got a kind of inclusive view on different world religions and that they all kind of speak the same truths. And a lot of Baha'i people like to work towards sort of interfaith activities. And so they were running an interfaith kind of prayer session and music session, which I went along to, and she'd written a really beautiful prayer song about peace, and all that really connected with me. So we sang it all together, and it was a really beautiful moment, and I felt like I felt God there in my heart, and wasn't that lovely? We were all together, but I still was thinking, yeah, but they don't know God like I do. You can't know God without knowing Jesus. I was like, you just can't. Like, the only way you know God is through Jesus. I heard her talk on the phone to like a friend or a sister or someone about the prayer session, where I had felt God in my heart because I was Christian. Of course I could, because I'd gone through Jesus and everything. And she described the same thing, the same feeling, literally the same thing that I had felt. I hadn't told anyone, She was like, I just feel like God was so close to me. And I was just listening. Other people who worshipped God felt God the same way I did.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Holy Spirit. It wasn't Jesus. It was something different, but it was the same feeling, and I couldn't get my head around it. Now, I had been studying a lot under an amazing professor called Douglas Davies, religious innovators, new religious movements, religious experiences. And since I've spoken to people about Sufi worship who've told me about their feelings, and it's sent tingles down my spine when I hear people talk about their experiences, when I realise I had the same. I realised that it wasn't something that was through Jesus and God necessarily, unless we want to say that God is doing it in different ways to different people. Maybe. That's one way to look at it. But to me at the time, that just rocked everything again.
One thing I'm intrigued to learn about from your time at university and in and around the late 90s and early noughties, air clubbing.
Yeah.
And dancing on the dance floor under the influence of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Tell us all about it.
I guess I've always been into music, so I play like the piano and the guitar and things like that. And I was kind of doing a lot of worship music, playing in worship bands, and just felt amazing, like freedom and this kind of closeness to God. And I've mentioned the charismatic worship before as well. And so I've always been into music. But when I discovered like dance music, it was just a whole other level. And listen to the lyrics in dance music, you know, all about love and freedom and power, and God is a DJ even, and things like that. I just was like, oh my God, all these people don't realize how much they're dancing to words about Jesus. You know, there was a song, Here Comes My Warrior. And I was like, don't they know that's Jesus, and Jesus is going to be their warrior? And you're surrounded by all these people who are, let's admit it, normally either drunk or something else. So they're all just like full of love and smiley faces. And it's so euphoric anyway as an atmosphere that it was kind of perfect for praying and dancing and praying and getting yourself into that state. Yeah, the 90s and noughties, it was very much like big fluffy neon boots, and I had neon paint, and I used to paint the fish symbol on me and like a lightning bolt that was the Holy Spirit. So I'd like put my armor on, I'd meet with my friends, we'd read the Bible before we went out, like other people would be doing shots before they went, you know, we'd be reading the Bible, really hyping ourselves up. And then we'd just go and like club and like dance our asses off and just feel really close to God. And I'd see angels on the dance floor with me. I would have visions about the people I was with. I'm
just imagining this sort of surreal scenario where everybody's under the influence of something or other, and you went with other people, presumably. You were going around speaking to people about Jesus.
At the university, there was always a group of us that went together. When I was back home, I would normally find other Christians to go and do it with, but sometimes I wouldn't. And I worked in the local pub as a waitress, and I absolutely loved that. And we would go after work on a Thursday, and they weren't Christian at all. And I just went, and they'd be doing whatever, and I would be drinking water and praying in the corner. And that's Ruth. She's just a bit nutty about Jesus. You know, that's all they used to say about me. I would stay chatting with them till the early hours of the morning about everything, about life, and obviously try and bring God in as much as I could. And that was my mission, you know. So then I joined an organization called 24/7 Prayer, and I really liked their emphasis on like real lived, powerful experiences of God, and social justice as well was something that at the time they were kind of committed to. And I got an opportunity to go with them to Amsterdam, and we did some prayer walking and prayer activities in Amsterdam. Then I went with them to Ibiza and spent 2 weeks in a house there full of Christians, and we were praying on the streets and talking to people about Jesus and walking people home when they couldn't remember where their hotel was, and asking people if they had prayer requests in the middle of like the massive clubs and everything. And litter picking as well, we did.
Did you find that people were receptive in these clubs?
Yes, absolutely. I thought they'd just tell me to F off. You've got to remember, I have been through years of trying to talk to people about Jesus and God and being told basically not to F off because they weren't swearing, but just, oh, leave it alone, Ruth, go on. You don't have any friends. I don't need friends, I said. I've got Jesus. I was like bullied. I didn't care. It was a sign that the Holy Spirit was working, that people were bullying me. I thought, well, that's the sign. Obviously, the Holy Spirit's working in them and they're resisting. So I'm going to keep on going. You know, I stood up in RE and I said, if I ever become an atheist, I will hold a gun to my head and kill myself, because I believed there was genuinely no point to life without God. You know, so for me to go to nightclubs where people wanted to talk to you about love, they were open to talking about it.
Yeah, I'm sure that some of the chemicals that were going around at that time made people a little bit more perhaps receptive to you.
It's the chemicals, but it's also the atmosphere. It's the fact that it's the lights, it's the music. It's, you know, if you look at now, when I look at obviously religious experiences and what's happening with the brain, you know, the rhythmic thumping of the music. Think about, you know, mantras in different religions or Sufi worship, you know, that kind of repetitive drumming of the noise. Even now I can go to these places, I'm not on the Holy Spirit anymore, I can still get like completely sober into these sort of states because of what we're doing to our minds, you know? So I'm not going to pin it all on chemicals. It's the fact that with their mates on a Friday night, they're not thinking about Monday and they're together and they're free, you know?
Yeah.
And that was the perfect time to say to people, we've got a prayer room. Is there anything you want me to just pray for you for? People were saying, oh, my mum's at home, actually, if you could pray about that, that'd be nice. One person was like, well, we just keep breaking everything in our room and we're really scared that we're like going to get into trouble. Like, we just broke the washer. Could you pray about that, please? I was like, okay, yeah, I'll pray about that for you.
So by the time you left university, you're not exactly an atheist, but you certainly have, how would I call it, a troubled relationship with Christianity. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose I would have been one of those people who's like, I'm not a Christian, but I'm a follower of Christ, you know? I love Christ, not the church, I would be saying, you know? I love God, but not the church, yeah.
Would it be fair to say that you still believed in the central tenets of Christianity, that Jesus was sent by God as a sacrifice for the sins of mankind, and he was raised from the dead 3 days after being crucified? Would those be beliefs that you still subscribe to at this time?
Yeah, if you stopped me and asked me, I would say yes. But I think at the time it was a lot of the other things like original sin, other religions, the Bible, I suppose people call those kind of secondary things, I guess, were really chipped away at.
So it was during your teacher training year that you lost your belief in God?
Altogether, yeah. Partly perhaps because I was teaching about my faith in a different way. And someone in the church, again, I think it was a different person, but someone else had said to me, when I said, I'm going to become an RE teacher, they said, this is my parents' church. But doesn't that mean you'd have to teach about all those other religions as well? I said, yeah, that's why I want to be an RE teacher, to teach about them all. And she, okay. And then I went off and thought, well, that's fine, and I was telling them all at the beginning I was Christian, and whether we think it's right or wrong for teachers to say what they believe, but I was, wanted to be open with them. But through the year, teaching about it really made me think about it differently again. Teaching about the other religions as well, sort of built on that. But I was still heavily involved in thinking we were going to stop the war by having a sit-in in our university library, and this idea that when George Bush got re-elected, we had been praying. So I was still quite committed. That's what I mean. I hadn't lost my faith, because I'd still go along to these prayer meetings. We'd prayed and fasted for 24 hours and prayed through the night, begging God that George Bush wouldn't get re-elected because of the war, because we wanted Al Gore in to do with the environment, the environmental crisis, God's beautiful world. And then when that happened, that he got re-elected, I just thought, no, I'm out. I can't do it. And that's the day I've always said when I thought I just can't believe in this God anymore.
So that was the light bulb moment, for want of a better phrase.
I don't know if it could be a light bulb. It's almost like the light.
Or the light went out, maybe. I don't know, yes.
The flame was snuffed out. The fingers went to the candle and snuffed it out,
Yeah, so there's that verse in, I think, the book of Romans, isn't it, that says something like, obey leaders, political leaders, because they have been put there by God.
Yeah.
And if you take that literally,
yeah.
What, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your take on that? Perhaps it was more of a comment than a question, maybe.
Yeah, so that's the verse that really struck me when we got to the end of our prayer and fasting session. And we saw the news that he'd been re-elected.
Damn.
That phrase just was pounding in my head like it says it. And then also the fact that that's Paul. And I'd already decided I didn't really like a lot of Paul's writings.
Yeah.
And then when I became an atheist, and it took me 6-7 years to talk to my family about it, I kind of kept it a secret. When I eventually came out as an atheist to them, it was Paul and Romans that my mum used to quote to me a lot.
Well,
if you want to win me back, Paul and Romans isn't really going to be the thing that brings me back. And that phrase, just hit me, and I'm like, well, exactly. Does that mean any leader? I mean, a verse that says something like, trust in the Lord, no matter what your rulers are like, he has a plan, or something like that, something that would recognise that they could be a bit crap sometimes, the rulers,
sure.
But I guess many Christians would say you can't just take one line out of isolation like that. You've got to read the context, understand the whole book, who it was written to, what was going on. Like, for me, it was the Timothy quote, women must remain silent in church, cannot have authority over a man. It shocked me to read that. And then it was in a book that might have been written by Paul. I just couldn't. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting a bit cross now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I always think back to the George W. Bush presidency and think if only people knew what Republican president was on the horizon.
I know.
George W. Bush seems quite benign in comparison, doesn't he?
Maybe a different Ruth would have sort of seen the long game, God working in mysterious ways, that maybe George Bush was so terrible that it meant we had Barack Obama and we had the first black president. Maybe I could see it like that, but I couldn't at the time. Here is someone who says they believe in God and that God is telling him to go to war. And that God, who's created the entire universe, when the Bible tells me that God puts people in charge, I must believe that God has put this person in charge. What reason? To kill more Iraqi babies? No. I thought I can't. I remember I just had this moment where I was like, I was praying for things and thanking God for I lost my wallet once and I got on my knees begging God to help me find it. It was there under my bed in front of my eyes. If I hadn't have knelt, I wouldn't have seen it, and I was like, oh my God, you're amazing. You've helped me find my wallet. And I was like, thanking God for answers to prayer left, right and centre. But then what about the prayer of like Palestinian mother whose child doesn't come home from school one day? Like, why would God answer my prayer and not that other one? Like, all these things just piled on, and I just thought I can't do it anymore.
So the re-election of George Bush was like a kind of sucker punch for your belief in God.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's a better idiom, maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know. Going back to your time as a person of faith,
Yeah.
and you talked about people of other religions having religious experiences.
Right.
You talked about yourself having religious experiences. You've also talked about the people on the nightclub dance floors almost having a religious experience
Yeah.
of some sort.
Yeah.
Do you have a natural explanation for these so-called religious experiences?
I sort of couldn't understand it at the time. I couldn't get my head around it. Like when I heard that my flatmate had these experiences, that really got me thinking. And then I was just so preoccupied, I guess, with everything else and trying to stop the war that I parked that until I started teaching about it at A-level. We were teaching about religious experiences. And I really got fascinated by the work of neurotheologians.
I didn't realise that was a thing.
Yeah, like Andrew Newberg, who does
Okay.
research into this, Michael Persinger, and also Ramachandran, who I love teaching about. So
Yeah.
these people look into what's going on in the brain when people have religious experiences. So there is studies on like what's happening in someone's brain when they're speaking in tongues. I was speaking in tongues all the time, by the way, as well, trying to get my head around that.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah. So I was fascinated by what was going on in people's brains. There's a study by, for example, Andrew Newberg, where he had people from different religious traditions meditating or getting into that sort of euphoric, ecstatic, mystic state, I guess. But I think they'd like consumed some liquid that could be shown on a brain scan, and you could see which parts of the brain were being activated and what was happening. And the same thing was happening to, I think it was Buddhist nuns that were meditating, getting to a state, and they used to have like a little button they could push when they got to that point, so he could see exactly at that moment what was going on. And people praying and speaking in tongues, he's done studies on that as well. And like different religious traditions, same thing is happening in the brain. Your brain is modifying what blood is sent where to which areas and the feelings that you're having and kind of enticing. I mean, people can look into this in more detail, but that gave me the explanation that I understood more. But then also for me, I'd done A-level sociology. And so looking at like Durkheim's understanding of religion and religious rituals and that group consensus that's brought about by going on a march to London with 30,000 people chanting that we love Jesus makes you feel that there really is a Jesus, you know?
Sure.
Or being in a stadium singing worship songs, because I was there with like 10,000 people singing this together, and you just have this, like, it's amazing, you know. For me, it was addictive.
And for males amongst us, we could make a comparison to going to a football match or something similar, couldn't we?
Together, or when you're at a concert and you're all singing the same song together. But this is like, it can take hours, and you are getting yourself into that state. And so the people I was with who may have been taking drugs, that were in the nightclub that I was trying to convert, you know, they had a quick fix, straight to it, however long it takes, you know. Whereas I was doing it over several hours and getting myself to the same state, because I don't know whether Andrew Newberg has looked into 90s rave culture as well. Like Ramachandran would say that God has inbuilt that into our brains as a way of being able to connect to him. It's another way for us to find God.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily prove that there's no God that's doing it, but for me, it explains it enough, you know, and I can look back on those experiences and now have an understanding. One of my best friends at university who never spoke in tongues, never had these experiences, never had these feelings, she used to beg God for them. She was begging God, why don't I have this? Why don't I have that? When I turned around and said to her, I'm an atheist now, she said, that's so unfair. You had all those feelings. God gave them all to you, and now you're not.
And they're wasted on you. Yeah.
She was it's just not fair, because I've never had that. And then I just thought, well, you know, it's just because I love music. I'm a bit of an attention seeker, and I'll just go for it in everything. So
yeah,
I don't know, where she couldn't feel that free. I didn't think it was God. And then I thought, well, isn't that proof that God's really unfair?
Sure.
It could have done with, she definitely could have done with those feelings, you know what I mean, to make her feel good.
Why does he give those experiences to some people and not others?
Yeah, whereas she was kind of mad with me, whereas I was a bit like, well, for me, that builds the case against there being a God that's doing it, you know. I shouldn't get so cross.
So you were brought up in a very religious household.
Yeah.
How difficult was it? How awkward was it to come out to your parents, so to speak, as an atheist?
Very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've since spoken to friends who I had at the time about when I came out to my family. And my friend who was sat opposite me is a beautiful woman, married to another woman, but at the time when we were at school, wasn't out and gay. And I just said, I'm really sorry to compare it, because it's probably not like this at all, but I always felt that it was like I was living a double life, and it was a bit like coming out as gay to my family. And I said, I'm sorry if you feel that's a bad comparison, because it's probably not similar at all to the hardships you've been through. And she was like, no, it sounds much harder to come out to your family. She said, I'm sure it would have been much harder. Not that they would say you must be Christian, but just the disappointment, so disappointed, because that is what they'd raised us to do. That's what they believed we were on earth to be as Christians, that they had been put together to have Christian children,
And did it take you some time to make the decision to speak to them about it?
Yeah, I hid it, really. I mean, I'm sure they probably knew, and if they're listening to this, or if I spoke to them, they'd probably say, oh yeah, we knew. But I just avoided going home at the weekend, so I didn't have to go to church on a Sunday. Because if you also remember, I'd had that discussion with the vicar about fair trade. After that and other things, I just couldn't sit and listen to him preach, for example, about stuff. I couldn't go to church. I still do. I love going for the coffee, fair trade coffee afterwards, seeing people I've known since I was born, friends and family, but listening sometimes to the preaching, I find it difficult, And I just hid it. I just avoided talking about it. They didn't know me, and I hid.
So what prompted you to come out to your parents as an atheist after spending so much time in the closet, so to speak?
So I met and fell in love very quickly with my now husband, Seb. Actually, when I was 16, 17, praying in those nightclubs, desperate to find the man of my dreams, as well. What I prayed to God for, I begged God for, was that I would marry a drum and bass DJ who ideally had not been Christian but had converted, so I could sort of ride his certainty of faith that he'd not been Christian but now was. That was the dream. But I did actually end up many years later marrying a techno DJ, so it's kind of close enough, So I met him, and he was a techno DJ, taking me to the clubs, and I had a lot of fun with him, and just fell mad in love with him, and realised that we were going to have a life together. He had a gorgeous, beautiful 4-year-old girl who is now my stepdaughter, and I just knew quite quickly, we were going to have a little family unit. And so I sort of introduced him to my family, and they're okay. They weren't sure. He's already got a kid. He's older than you as well. Okay, they could see I was very happy, but he said to me, "But you need to tell them that you don't believe in God." I said, I cannot tell them I don't believe in God. We'll just pretend. He's like, no, they don't know you. He said, they're your parents. I suppose because he's a dad as well. And he's very open with his mum. He said, they don't know you. You're hiding half your life from them. And any parent wants to know their children. He said, they'll accept you. They'll love you. I said, I know, but they'll also be very hurt. I never thought they wouldn't love me. I just thought they'd be hurt, and I couldn't bear hurting them. I sort of came out when I also wanted to have a child with him. I just was like, I really want to have a child with you. Let's do it. I'm never getting married. I was all like anti-marriage for me. I can't get married in the church. And I said this to my parents after I'd come out as atheist. I said, I can't get married in the church and say I believe in God when I don't in front of you, because it's a lie. I can't do it. Basically, it all came out. That's not very fair on my mum, is it? That she finds out that her youngest child's going to have a child out of wedlock.
Yeah.
And she doesn't believe in God all at the same time.
Wow.
We had reams of emails back and forth, and it was really painful. But ultimately, we're much closer now than we were in that period.
What's your relationship with your parents like now?
Really close, actually. I talk to them a lot. I don't always go into necessarily my thoughts about God as much, but when I'm home, I go to church with them.
Do you still think they're concerned for your soul?
I'm sure they are, but I hope they've come to a sort of acceptance that that's basically between me and God, really, isn't it?
Sure.
I'm sure they'd be praying for me to come back, They are absolute champions and supporters of anything I ever do, Any blog I write, they share it. Any book I write, they're telling people to buy it. Anything I do, So they just are my champions and support me completely. But I still think that they'll obviously be quite happy if I did believe in God again, But I did talk to my mum about it. It's my mum really. I have longer conversations about it where sometimes she said, oh, maybe we believe the same thing but call it something different. And she really wants to understand it. We spoke at great length quite soon after I'd come out. She's like, but what do you do with the sin problem? What do you do when you've done something wrong and you need God to forgive you? She said, for me, that's why I need Christianity, because it gets rid of that sin and that guilt, and it means I can move on, and it means that for eternity that's going to be wiped away. But that kind of evangelical idea that no one can ever be good enough on their own. And I said, yeah, but Mum, as soon as I realised that sin isn't really a thing, if I do something wrong, then it's between me and that person, and if I say sorry and they forgive me, then it's kind of dealt with. When as soon as I realised there wasn't this thing that was then attached to me, then I don't need Jesus to die on the cross to pay for it.
Yeah. So presumably your husband is an atheist too?
Yeah, he would describe himself as an atheist, but I think because he didn't have such a strong sort of religious upbringing, he hasn't done the same journey as me. So he's actually more open to things than I am. He doesn't necessarily believe in them, but he's just a little bit more open to different things about dreaming or about horoscopes. Doesn't mean he believes in them, but I'm just very quick to be very skeptical.
Sure.
So he just jokes at me like, all right, Richard Dawkins, We used to live on the top floor of this block of flats, and we'd see people walking past every Sunday to go to the flower market. We lived near Columbia Road, in London. And they'd walk every Sunday. And he'd say, do you know what? When I look down, people feel it and they look up at me. I know they can. And I'm like, okay, really? What, from like hundreds of meters away? Oh, yes, I think it can. And then I was like Googling it. This thing in the 1800s, people thought that you could feel someone looking at you. And I was like, I think you're fine. This was debunked back 100 years ago. So he keeps me in check a little bit healthily.
So going back to something we touched on earlier, you gave your explanation for religious experiences, your natural explanation for religious experiences. I just wanted to touch on the whole topic of speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
And my understanding of the origin of speaking in tongues is that, according to the book of Acts, it alleges that God gave the gift of speaking actual languages that other human beings could understand, so that the apostles could go to different countries where people were speaking different languages and they were able to preach to them in the native's own language. Now, that seems to have morphed into, you're speaking something that humans can't understand, but you're speaking the language of heaven or something similar.
I mean, the Bible also talks about, though I speak the tongues of angels, which I always thought of whenever I was speaking in tongues. Me too, I had those questions when I was at university and I tried to get my head around it.
So it's something that you used to do regularly when you were worshipping?
Yeah, I used to do regularly. I used to sing in tongues. I once sang in a club with some drum and bass music. I sang in tongues across the club. I used to sing on my own in tongues. I used to sing in worship sessions where people were singing in tongues. I cannot explain the feelings I had of love, of God, the feelings of oneness and godness I had. I cannot put it into words. It's impossible for me to put it into words. So how could words express that if I want to thank God or I'm talking to God in that moment? They can't.
Yeah.
So I have to just make a noise for my benefit, not God's benefit, for my benefit to unlock something in my mind. I make a noise like we do when we cry, when we shout, when we scream, when we laugh, and then I express something to God and I can just go heart to heart with God. And it's just like a pure channel of my thoughts to God, but it's for my benefit, not God's benefit.
So it's almost like you had the understanding that human language was limited.
Yeah.
And in order to convey certain emotions, you then had to speak this language of God, language of heaven or whatever.
It wasn't for the people around me and it wasn't for God. It was for me. At the same time, I was listening to things like Ella Fitzgerald, and there's a moment in a song where they're like singing away, da-dee-da-dee-da, and then they kind of go, ba-ba-ba-doo, ba-ba-doo-ba, and you know what they're saying, even though it's not words.
Okay.
They've sung this song about the love of this person that's made their life a joy, and then they go, ba-ba-da, and you know that means that's them continuing on. You know what they're saying, even though it's not words, and that's how I understood it.
Sure.
And since then, like giving birth to my 2 children, I've made noises that I didn't know were humanly possible while I'm giving birth. In human history, vocalizing things can release emotions, and it's like a release, basically. And so that's how I understood it at the time, and that's how I still understand it now. Not God, it was just me needing to release something. It does sound like gibberish as well, but then any language you don't know, if you listen into like a language you've never heard before, it does sound, unless you're like an amazing linguist, you can pick things up straight away to begin with. You're like, you've got to decode it, haven't you? And it just sounds like that. And I remember thinking, well, if God is in heaven and hears all these languages being spoken at all the same time, that would sound like nonsense to me. But God understands it. God doesn't even need the words. God doesn't need any of these people to pray to him or use any words because God knows straight into their heart. These words are just for those people to express something up to God. How secure I felt and how at peace I felt and at one I felt with God, and just how much love you feel for the whole of the universe, I
don't know if you've read Dan Barker's book, Godless. He is a former evangelical who now is president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation in America. He says that since he's become an atheist, he's able to kind of turn on the speaking in tongues bit. Is it possible you could give us a little blast of it?
When we used to have to dress up and act, we used to do like little plays, as little sketches, I guess, as the kids from Sunday school to the grown-ups. We used to do little sketches of Bible stories. So when it came to the speaking in tongues Bible story we had to act out, we used to say Mitsubishi Yamaha, Mitsubishi Yamaha, Mitsubishi Yamaha, Mitsubishi Yamaha, like that. I don't know if I could, and I don't think I want to.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, the kids always ask me that in school. I tell them my story and they always ask me to sort of turn it on. I don't know. Yeah. To me, it was so closely entwined with these feelings. It was never like, I knew the words were ridiculous,
Yeah, it always sounds to me like vaguely African the noises that people make. It's badakebabingin.
Yeah, bad as it used to be a little shalana as well. Shalana, like that kind of thing, And it'd be different depending on the different churches,
Yeah.
I am fascinated by it. Obviously, you can probably tell as I've been talking about it, I've always been fascinated by it. And I'd encourage anyone to look at the American news clip. I always use it when Andrew Newberg is looking at people speaking in tongues. And I always show that clip to the students because it kind of shows the sort of science behind what's going on.
Yeah.
People in the clip think it's proving there is a God and that something's really happening. But I think you can also see it in a naturalistic way.
So back in the day, you believed in a God that created the world, that sent his only son Jesus to die on the cross for our sins. You believed in a God that intervened in the world to help you find your wallet, to help you get a DJ husband. So your position today is that there is no God. We're all the product of millions of years of evolution.
Yeah.
And when we die, that's it. No afterlife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just sort of like that hippie stuff about living on in the memories of those who loved you, I love the idea of like pushing up daisies, having a kind of cardboard coffin where flowers grow and then the bees go to the pollen and then they make honey and, like that kind of thing. But nothing supernatural. Like I love the idea of those urns that you put your ashes in and then a tree grows out of the urn.
Wow.
Like Biolo tree or something like this. I think, I love that idea. But where I live now in France, it's interesting because a lot of people here, while they're not Christian, there's quite a lot of Catholicism here.
Yeah.
Where I am, I'm in the mountains in an area called the Ariège, and it's kind of known as the hippie bit of France, really, one of the hippie areas in the mountains. And there's a lot of people here who believe in a lot of the things that I just don't believe in anymore. But I really like living near them. People who have told me that there are pixies at the bottom of their garden who talk to them in the night. People who told me that, there's a portal to another dimension over there in that forest. There's people here who believe that there's a special mountain that aliens landed on. And I just think it's amazing I've ended back in an area where I'm surrounded with beautiful people who believe things that I don't necessarily. But I've said I quite like the fact that there's these people around me.
Yeah, and I mentioned in your introduction that religion is still something that you are fascinated with.
It is a part of the human drive, answering these basic questions that we have, Whilst it's all about George Bush being re-elected, I don't believe in God anymore. And I have got some questions about the church. Religion itself, I don't necessarily think is a force for good or bad in the world,
It's what people use it for, maybe.
Yeah, in the same way as there's other basic human needs and drives that are used by all sorts of people for all sorts of things. I've known plenty of amazing, fantastic individuals who were religious and their faith inspires me, but I just don't believe it. But I love what it does for them, like my parents who are really good people and their faith has been that thing for them. But for them, they both chose it. They were raised not religious and they went into that life through choice. They picked it up and they went for it,
Okay, Ruth, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Be very interested to hear your story and also your perspective on various religious matters.
Okay.
So thank you again for joining me on the Unshaw Podcast. If you'd like to contact Ruth, then her Twitter handle is at Ms. Marx RE. That's at Ms. Marx RE. That's at MZMARXRE. That's her Twitter handle. Thank you very much indeed, Ruth, for joining me this morning.
Thank you so much for the chance and for the fascinating episodes that you've got.
Thank you.
Into my arms, oh Lord, into my arms, oh Lord.